14 days, Huberman's dopamine protocol. And your brain, it doesn't just feel different. It starts acting like it's on a schedule. Here's the hook. In week 1, your focus and motivation can spike fast. Like you turn the lights on in your head. You get sharper. You get pickier about what deserves your attention. Things you used to scroll past suddenly feel louder. Then week 2 shows up and it gets real. Because the dopamine system isn't magic. It's wiring. It's timing. And if you push the wrong levers, that feeling can flip into this flatter, more restless baseline. Not a crash and burn for everyone, but enough to make you go, wait, what just changed? So what's the mechanism, plain English? Dopamine isn't just pleasure. It's your brain's prediction engine, how much effort it expects to pay off. When you control cues, timing, and reward patterns, you change what your brain anticipates. That shifts your drive, your attention, and even how quickly you get bored. Your practical takeaway from this video is simple. You'll see what actually moved the needle for me, what didn't, and how week 1 differs from week 2. So you don't accidentally train your brain toward the wrong kind of high. But here's the part nobody talks about. What happens to your baseline energy when the novelty wears off? Keep watching. Which one are you going to try first? Morning light, movement, timing your focus, or cleaning up the dopamine traps? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. The protocol, what Huberman recommends and why dopamine matters. Dopamine isn't just pleasure juice. Real talk. It's more like a learning and motivation signal. Your brain using it to update what to chase next, what's worth effort, and what might be rewarding later. Huberman talks about dopamine in that practical way too. The goal isn't to crank it all day, it's to make your brain's response to effort and cues more accurate. If dopamine's involved in prediction and drive, then messing with how you deliver stimulation can absolutely change your baseline feel, especially when you're running the same routine repeatedly. Here's the mechanism in plain English. Dopamine neurons don't fire like a light switch that says, happy now. They tend to spike around expectation, like when something might happen or when outcomes are better than predicted. That means your environment matters. If you're constantly feeding your brain intense, fast rewards, endless scrolling, frequent novelty, non-stop microdopamine hits, your reward system can start expecting that level of stimulation just to feel on. Then normal stuff, deep focus, boring tasks, even a quiet morning can feel flat. It's not that dopamine is gone. It's that the contrast changes, and the signal you're training your brain to expect gets skewed toward high-frequency novelty. So what does the protocol recommend, and why does it matter? In the broad strokes, Huberman frames dopamine management around keeping stimulation meaningful and timing it so your brain isn't constantly jacked up by random reward cues. That usually means being intentional about novelty, reducing constant ping stimulation, and structuring your day so you have windows where your mind can actually settle into effort. And this lines up with what you see in other behavior science too. Cal Newport's deep work idea is basically the anti-novelty play. You cut distractions so concentration has a chance to become rewarding in itself. B. J. Fogg's behavior design angle also fits. Make the cue and environment do the heavy lifting, instead of relying on pure willpower to resist every temptation in the moment. Now, in your 2-week experiment, week 1 is often where things feel the most different, but not always in the direction you expect. A lot of people notice they get sharper on one thing, like getting started. Cutting constant stimulation can make it easier to initiate tasks because your brain isn't negotiating with cravings every 5 seconds. You might also feel weirdly restless at first. That's common. Your brain is used to quick hits, so when you reduce them, there's a small withdrawal style adjustment. More boredom, more fidgety energy, more come on, give me something vibes. But if you stick with the protocol, that restlessness can flip into something cleaner. A calmer focus that lasts longer with fewer random motivational dips. Week 2 is where the baseline conversation usually shows up. Instead of feeling hyped in a jittery way, you start noticing you can sustain motivation without constantly needing novelty to keep it going. Your energy can feel steadier. Not more caffeine level, not more manic. More like your internal engine stops stalling when the task gets dull. That shift matches what you'd expect from dopamine being tied to prediction. You retrain what your brain anticipates as rewarding, so effort starts to feel more worth it sooner. Also, your habit loop starts to lock in. James Clear talks about this vibe with consistency. When actions become automatic, you stop spending mental energy on deciding. That alone can change how motivated you feel day to day. What works best in this kind of protocol isn't just the dopamine idea, it's the boring implementation details. Clear start cues help, like sitting down at the same spot, same time, with the same first tiny step. Erickson's deliberate practice work points to something practical. Repetition plus feedback plus clear structure is how skills and performance improve, not random bursts of motivation. If you use the protocol to create a few repeatable focus windows and then actually do the work inside them, you'll feel it. You'll get that dialed-in state that doesn't need a bunch of stimulation to kick in. And when you do reach for reward, food, scrolling, entertainment, timing it matters. Reward becomes a capstone, not a constant drip. But here's the part nobody talks about: what doesn't work. If you try to game dopamine by adding more intensity somewhere else, it can backfire. Going too hard on caffeine plus restricting distractions plus demanding perfect focus can turn into stress. And stress isn't the same thing as drive. Also, if the protocol pushes you to chase productivity while you're sleep-deprived, your motivation system can get messy. Matthew Walker emphasizes sleep's role in emotional regulation and cognitive performance. And that matters here because a tired brain often mislabels boredom as first need a stronger stimulus. Another fail case: no realistic plan. If your day has no clear deep work block, you end up cutting stimulation and then filling the emptiness with something else, just in a different format. Bottom line, dopamine protocol works best when it's less about more dopamine and more about better timing and better expectations. Week 1 often looks like adjustment, restlessness, fewer cravings, a new relationship to starting. Week 2 tends to feel like stability, steadier baseline energy, less need for novelty to get rolling, and focus that sticks longer. Which one are you going to try first? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. Day-by-day design. Sleep, light, exercise, timing, and constraints. You can't hack dopamine if your brain is sleep-deprived and your light cues are all over the place. That's why Huberman's protocol starts with sleep timing and morning light, because dopamine systems don't float in a vacuum. They ride on your circadian rhythm. And your circadian rhythm is mostly run by light and schedule, not willpower. In day-to-day terms, week 1 feels like compliance mode. You're setting a real wake time, getting bright light early, and trying to front-load movement instead of scattering it whenever you remember. Morning light is the big lever here. It helps tell your brain, today is starting. Then exercise shows up as a mood and focus stabilizer, not a random intensity lottery. You might notice you're not just more energized, you're more goal-directed, like your motivation has edges instead of fog. Still, the first several days can feel weird. Some people get wired but unfocused at first, especially if they keep pushing late caffeine or late screen time. Sleep can also be bumpy early, because your body is adjusting its internal clock. If you're used to shifting sleep around, week 1 is where your old routine starts fighting back. By the time you hit week 2, the protocol stops feeling like a task and starts feeling like a baseline. Your mornings get smoother. You don't need as much mental bargaining to get moving. That's consistent with what sleep science talks about. When sleep quality and timing improve, your brain's attention and emotional regulation get better too. Matthew Walker's work popularizes the link between sleep and next-day performance, and the practical takeaway lines up. Don't just chase more sleep, chase the right sleep schedule. You also tend to handle cravings and distractions a little better. Not magically, just enough that your automatic behaviors get quieter. Your focus improves in a way that feels more like reliability than hype. And exercise starts to hit different. Less of a jolt, more of a steady uplift that carries into work. Timing is where the real differences showed up for you. Day 1 versus day 14 wasn't just about energy. It was about when you felt that energy. In week 1, your best hours might still drift because your schedule is still settling. In week 2, your dopamine-related drive feels more predictable, especially around structured work windows. You'll probably see a pattern. When you protect your morning light and keep training/exercise earlier rather than late, your afternoon doesn't crash as hard. But here's the part nobody talks about. The protocol is only as strong as your constraints. If you keep sliding your bedtime later, if you skip the morning light, or if you make up for missed days with extra stimulation, the system doesn't reward you. It just resets the clock and you're back in adjustment. Likewise, if you go too intense too fast in week 1, you can sabotage sleep, and then the whole week feels off. Quick reality check. Motivation doesn't stay at peak all day. It comes in waves, and the protocol helps you surf those waves instead of drowning in them. What works best for most people in this kind of setup is consistency on wake time plus morning light, then movement that you can repeat without wrecking your sleep. What doesn't work is treating timing like a suggestion and using the dopamine protocol as an excuse to stack stimulation on an irregular schedule. So the win in week 1 is noticing you're more reachable for your goals. The win in week 2 is that your brain stops requiring constant friction to get started. Now hold that thought, because there's another twist. After you dial in sleep and light, the next bottleneck is what you do with attention during the day. Which part do you think you'd stick to first? Morning light, exercise timing, or locking in your sleep window? If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. 14-day results: mood, motivation, focus, and pleasure seeking. A lot of what Huberman talks about with dopamine is less feel-good hacks and more how your brain learns what's worth chasing. Dopamine isn't just pleasure. It's the signal that something is promising, that effort could pay off. And your brain is always doing that math, whether you're aware of it or not. In the first week, the biggest shift you notice isn't some dramatic happiness upgrade. It's that your mood starts to feel steadier, less spiky. You're not constantly bouncing between nothing matters and first need a win right now. Motivation feels more like drive than craving. You still get urges to scroll or snack or jump to something new, but they don't hit with that same full-body urgency. Focus also starts to feel more reachable. Not perfect, though. There are still distraction moments where your brain tries to sprint toward novelty, but you catch the urge faster and steer sooner. Here's the mechanism in plain English. When you reduce constant high-stimulation inputs and tighten how you approach tasks, your brain stops treating every minute of idle time like an emergency. The reward system adapts. That novelty thirst that used to feel like a command starts turning into a suggestion. This lines up with what folks study in addiction and impulse control. Your cues get stronger, your tolerance builds, and then your baseline starts to change as the environment changes. Dopamine spikes aren't the goal. Repeated spikes are the problem when they hijack your attention. The deal is you're retraining what worth it feels like. By the second week, the baseline energy tends to look different. Less jittery. More first can work without bracing. Motivation becomes easier to sustain because you're not constantly negotiating with cravings. Focus starts to feel smoother. Less starting friction. Fewer dead pauses where you stare at the screen thinking, "Why can't first just do it?" Cal Newport's whole deep work vibe fits here. When your environment supports concentration and you commit to fewer switches, your brain starts spending more time in that calm, engaged state. Still, don't expect magic. If you skip the boring guardrails for a day, that old restlessness comes back like it never left. Now for the pleasure-seeking piece, because this is where it gets wild. In week 1, pleasure-seeking feels like it's still there, just noisier. Like your brain's asking, where's the fun? Where's the reward? In week 2, you start noticing you can get satisfaction from smaller stuff without needing the biggest stimulus. A short walk hits different. Finishing a task hits different. Even food feels more like, first want this, instead of, first need this to feel okay. That lines up with the idea that when your reference point changes, what feels rewarding changes too. Your brain isn't broken. It's calibrated to the input you keep feeding it. But here's what doesn't work as well. If you treat the protocol like a punishment, you get tired fast. If you go all in on restriction without building better replacements, like real structure for when you'll work, when you'll move, when you'll wind down, your motivation can dip. You might feel flat instead of focused. Also, the protocol won't override poor sleep or nonstop stress. Matthew Walker talks about how sleep and learning are tied together. And if your sleep quality slips, your dopamine system feels less cooperative. Translation: don't try to out-hack a bad night. So the practical takeaway you can use right now is this: watch how your urges change week to week, not just how you feel on day 1. If your motivation turns from craving into a steady drive, that's the win. If your focus gets easier to start and easier to stay in, you're seeing the adaptation. If pleasure becomes more about meaning than stimulation, your reward system is recalibrating. But if you feel deprived or irritable, you probably tighten the screws without adding supports. And this is where it gets wild. What you call pleasure and what you call focus start to overlap. You might even catch yourself choosing work you used to avoid, because it feels rewarding in a quieter way. Which one are you going to try first? More structured deep work, fewer novelty hits, or a cleaner wind down? Then tell me what changed for your mood, motivation, focus, and pleasure seeking. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. Physiological signals: energy, stress, appetite, and sleep quality changes. So you can't just feel dopamine. Your body keeps score through energy, stress, appetite, and sleep. In 14th day challenges, those signals usually show up fast, especially if you're doing the kind of timed light, movement, and focus routines Huberman talks about on the Huberman Lab podcast. Why? Dopamine isn't only the reward hormone. It's also tied to motivation, salience, and how your brain predicts that effort will pay off. Week 1, your energy often feels a little spiky. You might notice you're more willing to start tasks, even when they're boring. That tracks with what we know about dopamine signaling and motivation. When your brain expects progress, it nudges you to chase it. But here's the catch. The same shift can bump your stress system too, at least temporarily. If you push early or go a little too intense, you can end up with that wired but not peaceful feeling. Cortisol is part of the stress response, and when you're cranking your routine, you can trigger a "now we're doing it" reaction. Ever feel keyed up and tired at the same time? That's the kind of pattern that can pop up when motivation rises faster than recovery. Appetite can get weird in week 1 too. Some folks feel more regulated, like cravings come with more structure and less random snacking. Other folks get more task-driven hunger, meaning you forget to eat until you finally crash. That's not magic. It's your attention system and timing getting remapped. When your focus improves, your brain stops interrupting you for little dopamine hits. Then it panics later and asks for fuel. You might also notice changes in your relationship with high-reward foods. Not because you became a different person overnight, but because the baseline search for novelty can shift when your day has built-in momentum. Thing is, this can swing either direction depending on what you do when the routine isn't running. Then comes week 2, and this is where it tends to get real. Your baseline energy often levels out. Not more energy forever. More like steadier energy that doesn't require you to be hyped all day. Motivation can feel calmer, too. Less like you're forcing it, more like your brain is smoother at initiating. Stress signals can soften once your body trusts the schedule. That's the key your nervous system learns. Matthew Walker talks a lot about how sleep pressure and sleep quality shape next-day mood and drive. And if your sleep improves even a little, your dopamine system won't have to work as hard to drag you into the day. Sleep quality is the big one. If your dopamine protocol relies on timing your day well, especially light exposure earlier and less stimulation later, your nights can start getting deeper or more consistent. If you mess with timing, though, sleep can wobble even if you feel productive. Sleep quality is tightly linked to how your brain handles cravings, stress, and emotional control. So week 2 might show you fewer late-night brain zaps, fewer wake-ups, or that smoother fall-asleep window. Or you might see the opposite if screens, late work, or late caffeine sneak in. Catch is, dopamine practices don't override physics. If you keep staying up too late, your body notices. Practically, what usually works is the consistent cues part. Your body starts predicting when effort will be rewarded, so initiation gets easier and your energy stops feeling like a roller coaster. What often doesn't work is going aggressive on intensity while treating the protocol like a sprint. If you ramp too hard in week 1, you can end up training your brain to chase stimulation instead of building stable motivation. Real talk, you want effort with recovery, not effort until you're fried. Hold that thought, because the wildest takeaway isn't dopamine goes up. It's that your stress and sleep decide whether the dopamine gains feel empowering or exhausting. And that's what makes your week 2 either feel dialed in or like you're chasing your own tail. Which one are you going to try first? Morning momentum, appetite timing, or sleep timing? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe, more brain hacks every week. What worked best? High-impact behaviors and practical replications. The high-impact parts weren't the mystical dopamine boosts. It was the boring, repeatable behavior stack you could actually run every day. Your brain doesn't need fireworks, it needs signals. And once those signals get consistent, motivation stops feeling random. That sound familiar? So what worked best in my 2-week run? Anything that made your reward system predictable and your effort friction low. Huberman talks a lot about how dopamine behaves more like a motivation and learning signal than a simple pleasure switch. That fits with what we know from Walter Mischel's marshmallow test work at Stanford. Kids who could shift attention and delay gratification tended to do better, because they learned how to manage the moment, not because they were magically happier. Your takeaway is simple. You want cues that reliably tell your brain, cool, action leads to reward. Then you pair that with enough self-control support that you don't have to brute force it all day. Now for practical replications, the stuff you can copy without needing special gadgets. First, do a bright start routine. Get outside light early and keep your morning clean of doom scrolling. Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley has been pretty clear that sleep and circadian timing shape how your brain performs the next day, and dopamine-style motivation goes sideways when your sleep timing is trash. Second, tie work to a clear next step, not a vague goal. That's straight-up Cal Newport energy. Deep work beats constant shallow switching for building momentum. When you tell yourself, first I'm doing 40 minutes of one thing, your brain treats it like a track it can stay on. Third, use deliberate practice rules, short reps, immediate feedback, and staying in the stretch zone. Anders Ericsson's work is the backbone here. Practice that's designed beats practice that's wishful. Here's what changed between week 1 and week 2 in a way that surprised me. Week 1, the wins felt mostly like hype. You're excited because you're paying attention, and your brain's basically like, oh cool, new plan. Week 2 is when the baseline shifted, less spike Y motivation, more steady first can start without negotiating. That's the difference between chasing dopamine and building a system. James Clear would call it habit architecture. Make the good behavior easier than the bad one. And BJ Fogg's behavior design angle clicks too. If you want it to stick, you can't rely on willpower alone. You need the trigger, the doable action, and the right moment. When first made starting easy, same time, same location, same first step, my motivation stopped being a coin flip. It got dialed in. But here's the part nobody talks about. High impact doesn't mean big. The behaviors that worked best were the ones that reduced friction and made reward cues honest. The stuff that didn't work was anything that tried to hack your feelings directly, like forcing intense focus while still letting your phone hijack attention. That turns into a cycle. You chase a dopamine hit, then you feel flat, then you chase again. Crash and burn vibes. The brain gets wired for the shortcut, and you're stuck doing mental gymnastics to regain consistency. So what should you replicate tomorrow if you want the best odds? Pick 2 anchors. Morning light plus a tiny, specific start action for your main task. Then add 1 deliberate practice block, short, focused, with feedback you can notice quickly. Keep it repeatable, not heroic. And track 1 thing that's measurable for you. Did you start faster on day 2 than day 1? Did your energy feel more even? Which one are you going to try first? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe, more brain hacks every week. What didn't? Failure modes, side effects, and confounds. You can't talk about Huberman's dopamine protocol without talking about the what didn't side of it, because motivation is messy, your brain's a pattern machine, and dopamine doesn't come with a neat on-off switch. Here's the key mechanism in plain English. Dopamine isn't just pleasure, it's what's worth pursuing and what might be worth learning. And your body constantly predicts reward based on context. So when you change your inputs for a couple weeks, you don't just change dopamine. You change expectations, attention, stress levels, sleep pressure, and even your sense of meaning around tasks. That's the real setup for failure modes and confounds. Week 1 for me felt like a honeymoon for focus, sharper starts, more let's go energy in the morning, and that wired but directed feeling when first finally sat down to do the thing. But the flip side, some of the motivation was just novelty. You know that kick you get when you start a new routine and you're like, okay, this is the one. That's a confound. Early gains can come from increased novelty, better scheduling, more deliberate planning, or simply paying closer attention. It can also come from rebound, because if your previous baseline was kind of chaotic, tightening the loop for a few days can make you feel dramatically better even if the dopamine strategy isn't the only cause. Also, if you ramp intensity fast, you can end up training your brain to expect bigger hits than your normal day provides, so the boring moments feel extra boring. That's when people start chasing, snacking on stimulation, or getting restless when the work doesn't deliver instant dopamine. By week 2, the wobble showed up, not in a catastrophic way, more like the shine wore off and my baseline became more honest. First, noticed motivation shifting from drive to stamina. Less fireworks, more grind. Some tasks that had felt exciting in week 1 started to feel flat unless first changed the framing, like making the next step clearer or lowering the activation energy. That tracks with how reward prediction works. If your brain learns that effort consistently precedes payoff, you get steadier motivation. If it learns that payoff is inconsistent or delayed, your system can start protecting you with procrastination or disengagement. The side effect first did call out wasn't a chemical disaster. It was irritability and mental friction on days when sleep got even slightly off. Matthew Walker has been pretty blunt for years. Sleep loss wrecks emotional regulation and cognitive performance, and that will absolutely mess with any dopamine plan. If your sleep dips, your motivation protocol starts to look like it failed when it might just be running on fumes. Now for the failure modes you'll want to watch for, because they're common and sneaky. 1. You overdo the reward structure and end up gaming your own brain. Too many cues, too much anticipation, chasing the feeling instead of doing the work. 2. You use it to bulldoze anxiety instead of addressing the root stress. If you're already stressed, dopamine-targeting behaviors can temporarily energize you, then leave you fried. 3. You mistake attention for effectiveness. You can feel more engaged while doing less meaningful output if you're using dopamine as a focus replacement. 4. You ignore the baseline confound week-to-week changes in schedule, caffeine, social stress, exercise, sunlight, and sleep will all swing your energy. That's why these experiments can be hard to interpret. You're not just testing a protocol, you're also living through normal life variation. Funny thing is, that's exactly what you'll experience in the real world, so it matters. Here's what actually helped me, practically, once first got past the initial novelty. First stopped treating the protocol like a personality transplant and started using it as a compass. Does this cue help me start? Or is it just adding pressure? When first made the next action tiny and concrete, motivation became way more reliable. When first protected sleep like it was part of the protocol, and not an optional extra, the dopamine plan felt less twitchy and more sustainable. And on the days where energy didn't rise, first didn't try to force it with more stimulation. First matched the task difficulty to my bandwidth, like pairing a hard sit-down with my best alertness window instead of trying to brute force everything at the same time. But here's the part nobody talks about. The protocol can work, and you can still feel like it failed if you're testing it with the wrong outcome measure. If your metric is, how high is my drive today, you'll get whiplash. If your metric is, can first start, can first persist, and does my mood stay stable, you'll see clearer patterns. Which one are you going to try first? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. Limitations and evidence check. What the research supports and what it doesn't. Dopamine gets talked about like some kind of reward chemical switch, but the research is way more boring and way more useful than that. Dopamine is involved in motivation, learning, and signaling, something worth paying attention to, not just happy juice. So when you run a dopamine protocol for 2 weeks, the question isn't, did dopamine go up? It's, did your behavior and attention get more effective? Sound familiar? Here's the mechanism in plain English. Your brain learns what predicts rewards. When you set up a routine that makes effort feel tied to a clear outcome, you're basically giving your nervous system consistent feedback. That lines up with what Walter Mischel showed in the marshmallow test style line of work. Kids, and later broader people in related research, do better at waiting and self-control when they can shift attention and manage cues, not when they just want it more. That's also why strategies like focused work sessions and deliberate practice tend to work. Cal Newport's deep work angle, protecting attention so you can actually build skill, maps cleanly onto motivation that's grounded in progress, not constant novelty. And Anders Ericsson's deliberate practice work basically screams the same theme, Performance improves when you train the right way, not when you just chase a higher feeling. Now, what does the Huberman-style approach have going for it? The best supported parts are the boring levers: sleep consistency, exercise, light exposure, cue management, and breaking tasks into something you can start. Matthew Walker's sleep research is pretty blunt about this. When sleep quality tanks, your ability to regulate attention and emotion takes a hit. So if your protocol helped you tighten your mornings, improve wake time reliability, and reduce late-night junk, you'd expect better baseline energy and more stable focus by week 1. Same deal with cue engineering. Daniel Kahneman talks about fast versus slow thinking, and if your day gets less hijacked by quick rewards, your slow, goal-directed thinking gets more room to breathe. BJ Fogg's behavior design idea, make the target behavior easy enough to actually happen, also fits. You don't need a dopamine spike. You need repeatable behavior that sticks. But here's the part nobody talks about. A lot of dopamine talk online is hand-wavy, and most of what you can measure in real life is indirect. You can't neatly track dopamine levels with a home experiment, and the human brain isn't a simple dial. Even with real brain imaging studies out there, dopamine signaling is context-dependent. Same circuit can mean learning one day and salience the next, depending on what your brain predicts. So when you feel better after the protocol, it might not be more dopamine. It might be better sleep, less decision fatigue, clearer goals, fewer distractions, or just that you're finally doing the thing because you scheduled it. That's why the placebo effect and expectation matter too, not in a fluffy way, just in a real brain way. By week 1 of your 2-week run, the shifts that usually make sense are the startup costs improving. Your motivation can feel sharper because your environment and routine get easier to follow. Attention often feels more directional because your cues are less chaotic. People tend to notice baseline energy rising when sleep and morning light are dialed in and when you're not constantly negotiating with yourself to begin. Week 2 is where it can go either way. If the protocol turns into a rigid checklist, you might feel less spark and more pressure. Or you might hit a ceiling where novelty fades, and your brain stops treating the routine like a new achievement and starts treating it like normal. That's not failure, it's your system adapting. If you keep progress grounded in real skill building, motivation tends to stay steadier. If you chase the dopamine high vibe, you can end up more irritable, more restless, or stuck in a loop of wanting the next stimulus. Bottom line, what the research supports is that attention and behavior learn through consistent cues, training, and sleep, and that motivation improves when you make effort predictable and rewarding in the learning sense. What it doesn't fully support is the idea that you can engineer dopamine levels like a video game resource and that the emotional feel-good spike will reliably follow a 2-week protocol. You can definitely move the needle in 2 weeks, but the most reliable wins are the evidence-backed habits, not the dopamine superstition. Which part of your day changed the most? Sleep, focus, or starting tasks without friction? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. By day 14, you can feel it. This protocol isn't magic. It's a lever. And week 1 and week 2, they hit different. In week 1, your motivation usually spikes. You're clearer. Your focus feels sharper. Baseline energy creeps up, like your brain is finally getting the signal that, oh, we're doing the thing now. Sleep starts to matter more, too. You're not just tired, you're aware of what's stealing your recovery. But here's the plot twist. Week 2 is where the shine either sticks or it doesn't. For a lot of people, the novelty fades fast. And then the real test shows up. Stress, cravings, morning sluggishness, the urge to catch up with stimulation. That's when you either stay steady with the dopamine hygiene, or you drift right back to whatever kept you wired on autopilot before. So what worked for you? The parts that usually hold are the ones that protect your attention. Cleaner mornings, fewer quick-hit distractions, and keeping high-reward stuff from running your day. That lines up with what Huberman talks about. Dopamine isn't the happy chemical. It's more like your brain's prediction engine. When you train your inputs, your expectations change. Your cravings change. Your focus changes. What didn't? If you tried to force intensity, pushing stimulation harder, stacking more reward than your sleep could absorb, or breaking the routine when you felt off, you probably felt it in the second week. Not in a dramatic crash every time. More like this slow drag on baseline energy. Like your brain started demanding stronger cues to feel the same kick. And yeah, sleep is still the boss. Matthew Walker's work has been loud and consistent about how recovery tunes reward and self-control. If your sleep got messy, your motivation probably got noisy. Hardwired pattern, not a personal failure. Bottom line, Week 1 teaches you what you want to believe. Week 2 shows you what's sustainable. Sound familiar? Which part are you going to try first? Cleaner mornings? Better timing for high-reward stuff? Or tightening your attention habits? Drop it below. If your brain liked this, hit subscribe. More brain hacks every week. And next time, we'll go deeper on the why behind the rebound effects, what your dopamine system is really doing when the novelty wears off.